Okay, so I'm going to answer a few questions that were from the chat, and then I will open it up to live questions. Let's see, somebody asked about other objects of concentration, and there the Buddha actually gave 40 objects of concentration. So there are lots of others. In some traditions, you might look at something like a candle flame. In Buddhism, we have, some of you may be familiar with what's known as the Brahma Viharas, which are the heart practices of Buddhism. Loving kindness, joy, compassion, and equanimity. Those technically are samatha practices. In some traditions, they use sound as a concentration practice. So there are many other objects available. The breath is used in many traditions across the world in various, not just Buddhism, because it's always there, it's available, and it's we don't have to do anything for it to be there. We know it's always going to be there. So it's a very commonly used object. Somebody asked about how this was different from Vipassana. And because Vipassana uses the breath and also builds concentration, which is true. So in Vipassana, because the breath isn't the only object, so this is, as I mentioned earlier, Sila, Samatha, Vipassana. So this person was asking about Vipassana, which is also known as insight meditation, or a lot of the mindfulness instructions are similar to Vipassana. In Vipassana, when we go beyond the breath, we might notice, like right now, it's more stream of consciousness, like I can see my hand moving and I can hear my voice. And now I'm feeling my legs on the chair, and now I'm seeing your faces on the screen. So, that's more of like a stream of consciousness with a lot of different objects. So in Vipassana, the breath is one of millions of potential things that could be coming through our awareness. What's consistent in Vipassana is the present moment, but the contents could be quite varied. So that's really how one of the ways that Vipassana is different. Another way that it's different is that really what we're cultivating is quite different in Samatha and Vipassana. In Samatha, because we're coming back to one object of awareness over and over, we're really challenging those compulsive thought patterns in a way that deconditions them, and that we can also see what they are. And also because there's one object, the serenity, there's a lot more serenity possible. Not to say there isn't serenity in Vipassana, there is, but in Samatha, with the one object, there's a lot more stillness that's possible. And also, as the practice goes on, I saw Chris has been asking about the jhanas, which I'm not going to get into tonight, but there are deep progressions of the practice. If one was, say, to do a 2-week retreat or longer retreats, that at that point, the two practices start diverging. But Vipassana is a great practice, and it's cultivating the capacity to be with whatever is arising without getting overly attached to the pleasant things, without getting overly, aversive to the negative things where we just can't stand it if something isn't the way we want it, or without getting bored with the neutral things. So in Vipassana, we're really learning to be with whatever is arising in our experience with a lot more equanimity. And that's important too. So both of these, kinds of practice are important for cultivating, peaceful living and the ability to suffer less. They're both really helpful. Let's see. Somebody had asked about when we're noticing what's going on in our awareness, is there a shift from when we're just completely identified with it to when it becomes an object where there's some space from it? And yes, that is one of the great things about, most meditations, is that we can move from being completely identified with our experience. Like, say we're having thoughts that are, we're having ruminating thoughts about something. The ability to go, oh, I'm having a thought about, I'm planning. I'm just compulsively planning. Like, I used to have a student who would come on long retreats, and she'd find that she would be planning her next retreat. So here she was on a 2-week retreat. Instead of being on the 2-week retreat, she was planning her next 2-week retreat, and she went, gosh, that's really silly. I should actually be on this retreat. So, we do these things, but all of them are taking us out of the present moment. So when we can now say, oh, that's planning. I mean, this is more of a Vipassana thing to identify that. It gives us some space. So in the samatha, we're not so much spending time with the thoughts the way we would in Vipassana. We're just coming back to the breath so that we break the compulsiveness of just going there. We're kind of deconditioning that compulsiveness. Let's see, what else do we have? Chris, I know you're wanting me to talk about the jhanas, but we're not quite at that point, so I'm not going to get into that tonight. Counting breaths. Yes, next week I'll give the instruction with the counting. So that is another way to find that we can stay with what's happening better. It brings some rigor to the practice. So next week I will get into how to use counting as part of this practice, but it can be a way of just staying with the breath a little bit better. And anyway, I'll get into that more next week. Let's see, I'm able to meditate first thing in the morning. Yes, I really encourage people to meditate at the time that's best for you, if possible. If it's better in the morning, then try and do your sit in the morning. Go with what is your strength and don't make it harder unless, sometimes we can't, we just don't have time. And so we have to do it at a time when we're not as sharp. But if possible, try and do your practice at the time that's most optimal for you. Let's see, some readings to calm the mind. Well, I think a lot of what Rick does is really helpful. I really love the way that he integrates the psychology and the neuroscience and the Buddhism. And he's, being a psychologist, he's very good at integrating all of that material. Why stay with the upper lip rather than the in and out of breath? Well, you are noticing the in and out, but you're not following it into the body. So we are noticing the in breath and the out breath as it's passing this area. So the object of the meditation is always the breath, just to be clear. Okay, can you speak more about cleansing ourselves? Yeah, so this really gets back to what I was saying earlier about the purification of mind and the thinning of the me. And one of the things we notice when we meditate is that we have a lot of compulsive thought patterns, that we keep going off into thoughts. And if one has an ongoing meditation practice, what you can start to see is that the thoughts have patterns. They're not, the particular contents might be different, but the themes are the same. Like, some people will find they go into fantasizing a lot. Some people will find that they go into planning. Some people will fall asleep during meditation. And whatever is happening, we're basically seeing the way our mind works all the time off the cushion. We're getting to see that close up because we're observing it. We're trying to be with a particular thing and direct the mind, and we're seeing all the things that get in the way of that. And so this is really what is happening when we're with purification of mind. We're seeing those, we're seeing maybe how they cause suffering. And through something like meditation, we're loosening that up. So we can always go back to the planning and the fantasizing and the, the ruminating if we want to. But if we don't have a choice, if it's compulsive, that's really where a lot of life suffering comes in. And the freedom from that is really a big part of what meditation is about. So we're deconditioning. This is the software upgrade from just having, synapses that are huge, because that pathway has been traveled over millions of times that may cause us to not feel that good. We're replacing that with something that is neutral or positive, which is the ability to just rest with the breath. And that's, in a simple way of describing it, that's what we're doing with a practice like this. Let's see, is there a difference between feeling sedated and becoming serene? Yes, and this is where the concentration and the serenity together, we're not just looking to go into a sedated place. That's not really what the practice is. And this is where one of the things that can happen is for the mind to become a lot brighter and a lot clearer, to have a lot more clarity of the breath. So this is part of what offsets a sense of being sedated. There's actually a thing that can happen in the practice, and next week maybe I'll talk some, if I have time, about the hindrances and how to work with them. That would be a good thing to talk about. But one of the things that can happen, especially in concentration practices, is that our concentration can get stronger than our energy level. So there's a balance of concentration and energy. And if the concentration is stronger than the energy, something can happen called sinking mind. And in sinking mind, we aren't thinking a lot, but there's a dullness. And, I've actually heard, like on the radio and other things, people trying to get people into this place of sinking mind. They're sort of encouraging sinking mind. What's good about sinking mind is that you're not thinking a lot. So it is serene. It feels kind of dreamy and like you're sort of in clouds, but there isn't really a clarity there. So it's fine if that happens. It's not, a bad thing necessarily, but then we want to just bring in a little bit more energy so that we're not really totally present when sinking mind's happening. There's a dullness to it. Let's see, is there an optimum amount of time for a sit? Well, I usually, it's really what works for you. If the most you can do a day is 5 minutes, do 5 minutes. I think that a really healthy daily practice for somebody who's been meditating for a while is 30 minutes. But that might seem like a lot for you, so you don't need to make that a bar that's so high you can't get over it. If you start with 5 minutes, and then if that starts feeling more comfortable, you go to 10, and then you go to 15, or maybe on the weekends you sit longer. When you have more time, that's another way to experiment with sitting longer when you're not so pressed to, get to work or things. But I really equate meditating with, for me, there was a big turning point in my 20s when I started noticing that the days I meditated, the days went better. Didn't really even matter so much if it was a good meditation or a not good meditation. It was more about the commitment to do it. And we now know from all of the neuroscience research of what there's between 200 and 500 studies a year now on meditation, that it's good for you. So I suggest moving it from the category of like cleaning out your garage, where you'll do it sort of when you get around to it and have some extra time, to brushing your teeth. That, we don't go in front of the mirror every morning as we're brushing our teeth and go, wow, I'm having a really good toothbrushing today. Maybe I'll do this again tomorrow because it was really good today, or if it's not so good, we go, well, no, I'm just going to skip that tomorrow. That wasn't very fun. We do it every day because it's good for us. And meditation is the same, in my view, it's the same thing where there's so much evidence now to show that it's good for us, that to really make that commitment. I mean, it may be a lot to do it every day, but to find an amount that's right for you and to stay with it is really my suggestion. Let's see, I wonder if there's anybody who has their hand up. No, we've got all chat, so I will keep looking at the chat here. Okay, what do I do? Somebody was asking, what do I do if, what do I do with hindrances? I'll talk more. Oh, obsessive thoughts. How do you work with obsessive thoughts even when you keep going back to the breath? Well, this is pretty much the human condition. We're getting right into the first noble truth of Buddhism, which is as long as we're identified with the ego self and with our thoughts as being something compulsive that we are so identified with that there's no space or freedom from it, we're going to suffer. That's really what the first noble truth of Buddhism is saying. So meditation is basically exercise for your consciousness. That's what it is. And if you think about the samatha practice as strength training and vipassana like cardio, they're all doing something for our consciousness. So when you have obsessive thoughts, part of what we're doing in the samatha practice is we're coming back to the breath. It's just like lifting weights where you're doing your 15 reps. You're doing repetitions for X amount of time. And every time you find you have an obsessive thought and you come back, you're challenging. I mean, now they know in the neuroscience, you're actually challenging the strength of that neural pathway. So those obsessive thoughts, usually they're not helping. They're at best neutral and at worst causing some kind of suffering. So really the way to gain some freedom from that is to challenge them by coming back to the breath. And, I have students I've worked with now for 15 years who've been with me since the beginning when I started teaching, and their lives are better. It's something that, just like with physical exercise, if we stay with it over the course of time, you may not see it day to day, but over the course of like months and years, you can see that your life is better, that you're suffering less, that you're doing less harm. And I love it when people come and they say, well, it was, my spouse or my kids noticed that I used to get triggered by this and I don't get triggered anymore, or I get less triggered than I used to. That's what I mean. When we're getting triggered, that means we're so identified with that belief that that it could, ruin our whole day. I mean, the worst case of this kind of getting triggered is when we see somebody in a road rage incident. Somebody cuts them off in traffic. I mean, they may not even have seen the person, but, we'll forget what the reason is. You get cut off in traffic and it ends up in one person killing the other. I mean, we've all seen this in the news. Talk about being compulsively identified with your thoughts. Nobody who's in prison for killing someone else in a road rage incident, if you go to ask them, was it worth it? None of them are going to say yes. But they were so compulsively identified with their thoughts that when that happened, they couldn't break away and stop doing it. So this is, nobody here would do that, of course, but this is really it's the same principle, is that we're challenging the way in which each of us, and we all have this. I mean, it's part of the human condition until we start doing something about it. We have these places where we can get triggered, and we're deconditioning that. We're escalating that, and we're deconditioning that neural pathway that led to somebody killing someone else in a road rage incident, or, you know, our version of that where we suffer. And so that we can suffer less than we suffer when those neural pathways are so deep that we can't get out of them. And that's what we're seeing in meditation. We're seeing the ones that are so deep that we can't get out of them. So this is really what we're doing with the repetitions of challenging those patterns, basically, so that we have more freedom, we have more of a choice, that they aren't so deeply ingrained that we basically have no choice except to get identified with those thoughts. Okay, so our time is up, and we will be having the breakout groups in a minute, but thank you for being with me, and I look forward to being with you next week to get into working with hindrances and more about what is concentration, what does it look like, and how can it deepen. And thank you all for being here. It's really been lovely to be with you. Thank you, Tom.